The developers of Space Engineers 2 have reiterated many times that they still plan to release Vertical Slice 2, the Survival on Planets update, before the end of the year. And the release of the update is looking to be very soon now, as they've recently said they're focusing on fixing bugs and polishing the update to get the update stable for release. So I would expect a release date announcement imminently. With the update's release being so close, they've shown an absolute ton of things that they've been working on or recently completed. And some of this stuff will absolutely blow your mind. So let's take a look. A while ago, we received this behind the scenes image of the annual Keen Software House meetup, and in the background of this image, we saw something very peculiar. What appeared to be a map that was planned to be added to Space Engineers 2. I spoke at length about this map in this video here and what it could mean, and now we have our first look of what it will look like in game. Now I'm fairly certain that this here is concept art, for reasons we'll discuss in a minute, but even so, just seeing this concept art gets me really excited about this coming to the game. Having a map in Space Engineers 2 will be a massive deal for the game, but it's not just a map to show you where you are. We know that this map is linked to the new optional colonization and progression system in the game. So on the left, we can see a list of GPS markers. I'm not necessarily sure any of these mean anything, because as I said, I'm pretty sure this is concept art, and this is probably all placeholder text. And even if it wasn't, I don't think you can glean anything from this anyway. Like, even at a most basic level, you can see that you are here, and then on the bottom right, we've got this beacon uplink, which is apparently 5.32 kilometers away. But this power node, which definitely appears to be closer on this map, is 101 kilometers away. Sure, space is an up and down, but I don't think that's what this is showing here. We can see our 3 planets, Byblos, Verger, and Chemic, and then in the middle we have the brown dwarf star Delphos. Now I know this doesn't look like a brown dwarf star, but we've been told in the past that this is a brown dwarf star, and also later in the video there's also information that confirms that this is a brown dwarf star. So just be patient, all will be explained. In the bottom right, we have our fast travel button. We were told previously that we're able to fast travel between sectors that we've unlocked, but currently we don't know much more than that. We do know that the fast travel system is optional though, and you can still manually fly to each sector as you normally would. And also that my nemesis, the jump drive, still exists. It's just a late game tool now, which funny enough is what I suggested it should be in my video on the jump drive. Zero keeps on winning as always. Also, what you're seeing on screen here are the recently revealed graphics that show when fast traveling around the Amager system. They kind of have a hyperspace vibe, which I think looks good. The next screenshot of the map we have here is of the Colonisation tab of the map. Again, I'm pretty sure this is concept art, but it does give us a couple more interesting details. For example, on this image there are 15 sectors and currently 3 of them are unlocked, that being the 3 that surround Verger, the Earth-like planet. And then you can see that the cursor is hovering over the Chemic sector, and below it we can see that it has 24%, which presumably is the colonisation progress. Colonisation in Space Engineers 2 is basically a reward for completing quests in the game. So as you complete quests, your colonisation progress of that sector will go up, and then once you've 100% colonised that sector, it will allow you to unlock the next sector to colonise. We're not sure of the full details to colonisation yet, as we haven't really seen any of the missions and stuff, but we have been told that it's an optional system, so you don't need to engage with it if you don't want to. On the left-hand side, you can see that selected sector is Verger, which is 36% complete, presumably 36% colonised, and below this you can see a list of discovered objects, presumably in this sector, and the first one I want to draw your attention to is the Palantir moon. Like I said, I believe these images are concept art, but we have been made aware in the past that there's potentially a moon around the Verger planet, so potentially Palantir is the name of this moon. Additionally, there's Verger rings. Now we haven't been shown any images previously that show Verger having rings, but we have been shown this video here, which shows that the engine does support placing rings around planets, and this is specifically showing the Verger planet, so potentially Verger will have rings in the game, or again, potentially this is just a concept art placeholder thing. And the final 3 things here are Abandoned Station Styx, the Alta asteroid belt, and Giant Ice asteroid. As I've said in the past, one of the things I'm most hoping for in Space Engineers 2 is having set points of interest for you to visit and explore, and things like a giant ice asteroid and an Alta asteroid belt sound like set locations in the world, and potentially the Abandoned Station Styx is a tailor-made station rather than something randomly generated for you to find and explore. Potentially it has something to do with the story that has been mentioned in the past as part of the game. And then below this, we have raw materials being ice, nickel, iron, and silicon. Nothing special there, although it is interesting that hovering over a sector does tell you what resources are there. So potentially as we make our way around the star system in Space Engineers 2, different sectors will have access to different resources. One of the biggest problems with progression in Space Engineers 1 is pretty much wherever you are, you can get all the resources. So progression is kind of flat, as it's a bit difficult to gate it otherwise. So having resources in different sectors, especially if certain resources are limited to certain areas of the map, rather than each area just having a progressive amount of resources, that'd be a much improved way to do that, especially if the difficulty of these areas increase as the resources are available to you do as well. And the final images of this map, before we get to see it in game, is this image here, and this appears to be some sort of fast travel network. As you can see, there's little lines going between all these different markers on the screens, and then these ones up here have locks on them, presumably to indicate that you can't fast travel to these locations. If we go by the previous map, we can see that the sectors unlocked are these 3 over here, and then if you compare that to the fast travel map, the white lines are filled in, presumably showing access to these sectors, and then they are locked out in these sectors we don't have access to. Again, I think this is concept art, but it appears that some of these have been placed down manually. For example, Aluminium Heaven doesn't sound like an in-game location, that sounds like a marker someone would place down. So potentially you can fast travel to your markers as long as they're in a sector that you have access to. And this Mayday encounter over here appears to be very similarly named to a Space Pirate encounter in Space Engineers 1. However, there is one location on this map that I know is a real place, and that's where we currently are, Velation Station. These images here were shared of Velation Station, and we believe this station is the one mentioned to be the goal to visit at the end of the first time user experience in Space Engineers 2, which is kind of like the tutorial of the game. The basic gist is that you start the game by crash landing on the planet Verja, the Earth-like planet. You find an abandoned base with a ship on it, and then you're given a marker to fly to a station at the end of it. And that station is presumably Velation Station. And then from there, going from this map, we're able to then fast travel from Velation Station to anywhere else we've unlocked. So whilst Velation Station is something we've actually seen in game, all the maps I've shown you so far don't appear to be actually in game. And that's because we've recently found out that the map and the colonisation system were not planned to be part of Vertical Slice 2, but they wanted to add more stuff to do in Vertical Slice 2, so at the last minute they decided to add in this map and colonisation system to give us something to do. So last month we were shown this video here. You can see that we're on Verja, the Earth-like planet, and you can see on the top left we have the information about the first time user experience. Specifically what I mentioned earlier was that there's a weather station in the mountains and there's a half-finished ship up there that you can find to repair and then eventually get up to space. And then you can see they open the map. So this is a very early prototype version of the map. And as you'll see in a minute, the map has progressed a lot since this first video, but different features of the map are shown in each video. So we'll start at the first look at it and then we'll go forward of what's shown later. Here you can see our sector selected is Helionis, and that appears to have Verja, our Earth-like planet, in it. And once again, our brown dwarf star isn't looking much like a brown dwarf at the moment. You can see our list of ores on the left, which is very similar to how they looked on the concept art. And then they open up the admin menu, and on the right-hand side, you can see a list of more sectors. Trinarch, Sablon, Zenith, Oryx. I think if I go further than that, I'm going to fail to pronounce them, so I'm just not going to do it. And they scroll down this list, where you can see options to modify the colonisation progress at the bottom, and then they slowly add 20% colonisation progress until the Helionis sector appears to be fully colonised. And you can see once it is, the 2 sectors to the left and right of it turn blue, presumably to indicate that they are unlocked for colonisation as well. They proceed to add colonisation progress to the neighbouring sector Noctera, which then unlocks the 2 sectors next to that, and so on and so forth. They skip forward a little bit in the video, and you can see they've added another planet in, which we'll discuss in a minute, and they go to the GPS tab, and you can see a list of GPS. Now we know that the Explore GPS and the Investigate GPS were both in front of the player when the previous teaser started, and you can see that they appear on the map to be on Verja, the Earth-like planet, and they have like a stacked paper symbol to show that there's 2 there, and you can see when they hover the mouse over the GPS, it shows that both are there. It appears from this that there's potentially a way to zoom in and look at the colonisation map of a specific planet and see exactly where your GPS are located. And that is going to be very useful if that is the case, but I'll leave that for now because we see that later on. You can see there is an option to sort markers on the left, and also an option to search for markers at the top, which will be very useful as management of markers is one of my biggest pet peeves with Space Engineers 1. And you can also see that when you select a GPS marker on the left, it highlights the marker on the map as well. And these 3 changes to the way the GPS markers work, mainly that you can see them on the map and highlight them, will be an absolutely massive improvement to the entire GPS system in Space Engineers 2. In fact, if there was an option to create groups of GPS markers, I think this would fix all of my issues with GPS in Space Engineers. There's also a third video where they place a planet in, specifically Chemic, the Mars-like planet. Once they place the planet in, they go back to the map, and you can see, oh, this is our second planet from before. It dynamically appeared on the map when it was placed, and you can see when you hover the mouse over it, you can potentially select it. Now it appears from space that it has the same texture as Verja, which is obviously not correct, but as we mentioned before, this is the first working version of this, so obviously the visuals are something they're not prioritizing at the moment, but as you're about to see, the map already looks way better than this anyway. Roughly a month later, we received this look at the map here. You can see it's already changed a lot, and our brown dwarf now actually looks like a brown dwarf. Incredible. All we had to do was wait a month. You can see Verja on the bottom over here, and then Chemic on the side is decidedly looking more like Chemic. And on the right hand side, we can see our Almagest star, which, due to the way the skybox works, orbits around our brown dwarf star, or potentially our brown dwarf star orbits around it. But for gameplay purposes, we're at the center and the star orbits around. And our planets, Verja, Chemic, and in the future Byblos, our water planet, will all orbit around our Delphos brown dwarf. If it is a brown dwarf, of course. And there's not some secrets hiding inside of it. See the lore video for more information. You can see that the ores in our sector has changed. We now have a number of ores in our Verja sector: chromium, cobalt, copper, ice, iron, lead, magnesium, nickel, silicon, and stone. Well, I would expect stone to be there anyway. And in the previous in-game videos, we only had 10 sectors, but now we are back up to 15 sectors as shown in the concept art. So presumably, eventually, this colonization map will start to take shape and look more like the colonization map on the concept art we saw previously, in terms of the locations of these sectors and planets is what I mean. The developers also recently released a video going in depth on the map, and in that video it was revealed that the next update will only include 5 of these 15 sectors, and that more sectors will be added as the game updates. That same video also mentioned that, as I suggested earlier, ores are sector specific, but whether that means that later sectors will have access to extra ores as you progress through the game, or that certain ores only spawn in one sector or planet, we'll have to wait and see. We also get 2 more screenshots of this, where we zoom in, specifically zooming into the Verger planet, where we can see exactly where we are on the planet, and presumably if there were GPSs on this planet, we'd be able to see all of those as well, visually on the planet. And I am very excited for this. Again, the ability to visualize where GPS are in 3D is going to make a massive difference to the game. Although I do find it funny that where the UI here points is in the middle of the oceans of Verger, which obviously aren't in the game yet because water is coming later, but I do find it funny that this player is just stood in the middle of where the ocean would be. Also, I'm really liking there's an island up here. This is going to be Zero's island. You can't take it from me. I've already laid claim to it. I'm going to build a little area where the palm trees fall down and Thunderbird 2 comes out. I'm going to have a swimming pool that Thunderbird 1 comes out. You can't stop me. It's already happening. And there's also this GIF here of the clouds moving around the planet, and you can see that the lighting is a lot different, whereas in the previous screenshot it was quite washed out, whereas here the lighting looks a bit more realistic. So presumably this is still in active development, and they're still working on the visuals of this, but the map system itself looks to be pretty much fully realised. One of the interesting things about the map though, is that we've seen lots of pictures of the map and how it's working and how it's progressing, but the map exists for the colonisation system, and we haven't seen anything to do with the colonisation system yet. We were recently shown this contracts block here, and we were told that until NPCs are added to the game, that this would be how we get missions for colonisation, but we've still not seen anything to do with these missions yet. As I mentioned earlier, there was a video released that went in depth on the map, and in that video they spoke briefly about contracts, and how in the future there'll be a variety of different types of contracts, but the ones in the next vertical slice will focus on engineering, so things like repairing and building structures and stuff. Which is nice to know, but we still haven't seen what any of that actually entails. If I had to guess, the reason we haven't seen any of this so far is because this is something they're currently developing, as we know that the map and colonisation system were the last things worked on for this update. So I would imagine we'll find out about contracts and missions soon, so like and subscribe if you're interested in that. Water is one of the big features coming to Space Engineers 2, but it's very important to note, whilst they've been showing off water recently, water is not coming in the Survival on Planets update. It's coming in another major update that is coming out next year. However, that doesn't stop us getting excited for it. First of all, we have 2 clips, which are the first working example of an airtight submarine that doesn't have water inside of it when it moves. As you can see here in this clip, whilst it isn't perfect and there's a bubble of water around the ship which you can see on the wall over here, it's a very clear example of the blocks around the ship preventing the water from getting inside of it. That is, until the engineer removes a block from the wall of the ship, and then the water flows in, flooding the ship. Obviously with a bit of lag, but as I said, this is the first working example of this, and optimizations will come in the future, as you'll see in a moment. I can see a much better example of this at the front of the ship, where there's kind of a bubble of water around the front of it, and whilst it's not perfectly matching to the glass, it is a big step for the development of the water in the game. We have to remember that this water is fully volumetric and can be picked up and moved, it's displaced when something impacts it, it can flow down a valley and flood it, as we've been shown many times before, and there's very few games that have actually attempted to have water with this level of simulation, so seeing all of this working is actually really impressive. That then brings us to this video here, which is that same sub with no water inside of it, moving along through the water. And as you can see, as it surfaces, the water is displaced around the ship, and then when it goes back under, the water is then displaced again. But Zero, it's lagging! Volumetric water won't be possible in Space Engineers 2. Wow chat, that's crazy. 2 weeks later we have this video here, which you can see, the lag is almost non-existent, it's doing exactly the same as before, the water deforms as the ship goes through, seems pretty good to me. And then we have from the inside of the ship, and the water, whilst not perfect, it's no longer creating this large bubble around the ship, there's just a little bit of water around the edges of the blocks. And then they remove a block, and there's no big lag spike when they remove a block, it just happens seamlessly, and the water flows in, looking absolutely beautiful when it does. And that's just the progress of water in 2 weeks. Imagine how much better water is going to look in a month's time, or in a couple of months' time, when the water is officially added to the game. This here is another test from almost a month after the last one that I showed. And in this one, you can see that they grind down a block, and the water is able to flow through the gaps in the block that appear when it's partially constructed. And then they weld it back up and the water stops flowing through the gaps, but as you can see here, the water that previously flowed through the gap maintains on the other side, meaning that the water has permanently moved from the other side of this wall into this area on the other side. This clip here shows our first look at a ship, and I use that term loosely, moving through the water with the new water propeller blocks. We've seen a bunch of concept arts of these in the past, but this is our first time seeing these propellers in game, as other teasers have previously used atmospheric thrusters to move through the water. This clip goes on for about a minute with them crashing the ship a couple of times, and it's important to note that these aren't the final version of these thrusters that will be making their way to the game. In both terms of design and function, this is just a proof of concept of how these propeller blocks will work in the future. There's a couple of images of water. We have this image here of a kind of lake or bay, and apparently there's a little engineer hidden in this image. Can you see him? I'll give you a couple of seconds to look for him. There he is, right down here. It's funny how without that engineer, you'd have no idea how big this bay actually was. One thing I want to point out is when Space Engineers 2 was first released into early access, the Pioneer edition of the game included a bunch of behind the scenes videos on the development of water, and water was this like weird plasticky jelly that was completely opaque. And now we have this water here, and it's semi-transparent. You can see the land underneath the water, and also the water now reflects the surface above. You can see that this cliff here is reflected in the water. It looks so good. It's going to be amazing when it's added to the game. And also, more importantly, there's a second feature in the screenshot that will also be very good when it's added to the game. It's just over here on the left. Yep, that's the one. Yep, keen, get on that. What he means to say is cable. In one of the dev diaries about water, they talk about features that are becoming in Vertical Slice 3, which is the update that water is coming in, and it's actually really interesting. So first of all, they talk about swimming animations, which is really interesting. Obviously, it makes sense if you had water to the game, there would be swimming, but I can't even visualize that in my head. There's nothing like that in Space Engineers currently. Like in my head, you just fly into water with a jetpack and you just float around in there like you would in space. But actually having swimming animations, that's going to be pretty cool. Obviously submarines, we've discussed that already. Biblos, so water planet, we've discussed that as well. Pressure simulations at certain depths, that's very interesting. Are you going to have to build a submarine that can survive high pressure environments so that your submarines don't get crushed when you go too deep? And more importantly, is there going to be a reason to go that deep? There's lots of hints in the lore of the game, which we've discussed in this video here, that there's something mysterious in the depths of Biblos for us to discover. And with there being a pressure simulation, that means you'll have to design a ship for a specific purpose to overcome that high pressure. And that, my friends, is an engineering challenge in our Space Engineers game. And that's very exciting. They've also been showing off a lot of underwater flora designs as well. This clip playing here is a recent example. And I think this lends even more credence that we will have a reason to explore the ocean depths in Space Engineers 2. New blocks, pumps, ballast tanks, turbines, etc. We've seen some of these already, the turbines we saw in a previous dev diary. Pumps we've been shown a couple of times, both picking up water and expelling it. And we've recently been shown some concept art of water tanks as well. And above this design you can see an engineer swimming, which is still crazy to think about. Water audio, splashes, underwater muffling, walking in water, etc. Makes sense. Water-specific missions. Missions are one of the things I'm most curious about in Space Engineers 2. And having water-specific missions, does that tie in with our pressure simulation? I hope so. Ore distribution in aquatic environments. Imagine if there's an underwater ore you can only get on Biblos. Now that's very interesting. Buoyancy and boat movement on the surface, obviously self-explanatory. The teasers of the submarine appear to be using atmospheric thrusters, and the submarine is kind of flying like a ship rather than a boat or submarine as it actually is. So this is something they'll need to add to make it work like an actual ship would. But we have seen teasers in the past that show off buoyancy, so obviously this is something that's already worked on. It's just not present in the submarine teaser. And then water optimizations to ensure good performance, which is obviously the thing they'll do last because there's no point in optimizing something before you've added it. There's also a note on features that are coming in Vertical Slice 3 that aren't water related, and I think this is very interesting because this also gives us an indication of what is not coming in Vertical Slice 2 Survival on Planets. Number 1 is survival improvements, production system, oxygen, block wrappers and area welding. That means none of these things are coming with Vertical Slice 2. I presume by production system, it doesn't mean the production blocks, because otherwise how would you play survival without the production blocks? So I'm sure they're going to be there. Maybe the more advanced production blocks aren't there, but I'm guessing the basic ones are. This might actually tie into block wrappers, which is a system where you can combine the components of a block into a single item in your inventory. So say you need 3 solar panels, you'd have 3 of this item that contains all of the components for a solar panel, as opposed to having an inventory full of random components. Area welding isn't something I think we've seen demonstrated in the game so far, but it's the idea that when you weld a block, it welds the blocks in an area around it, which is especially important when they've added the 25cm blocks, which are incredibly small, and welding up each of those by hand would be a massive pain. And then oxygen is self-explanatory. I imagine oxygen and water probably go hand in hand, as an airtight ship means that water can't get into it, and it also means that the air is kept inside of it, allowing you to pressurize that environment for either space travel or sea travel. New welder and grinder blocks are coming in Vertical Slice 3, which probably indicates that welder and grinder blocks aren't going to be in Vertical Slice 2. So we already have ship drills in the game, as they were added in the first release of the game, but it seems from this that welder and grinder blocks won't be coming in the survival update and will be coming on later. Weather is planned for Vertical Slice 3, so there won't be weather when Survival on Planets drops. and there is more things planned to come in this update, but the plan isn't finalised yet, so everything I've just mentioned here is subject to change in the future. I think the most important takeaway from this is that while survival and planets are coming this year, the entire survival mode of the game won't be complete when it arrives, as indicated by the fact that oxygen, welder and grinder blocks and more won't be available when it releases. But it's worth keeping in mind that Vertical Slice 2 is focused on the core features of survival and getting those right first, and also planets are there too, I guess. Hello! And as the game continues through early access, other major survival features will be added, along with other features like water and NPCs and other major features down the roadmap. We've already been told that there will be updates coming out between Vertical Slice 2 and 3, and one of the things that will be worked on in those is weapons, so potentially more survival features could be added in those updates. With the planets and survival update for Space Engineers being so close, the developers have shown a lot, and I mean a lot, of pictures of planets, because I'm presuming they're almost done. We know that this planet and survival update is planned to release before the end of this year, so it makes sense that they're probably very close to release. You can see in this picture here is some sort of valley with trees on the left and right hand side, and I have to say I really like how this path down here looks. I don't know if this is supposed to be some sort of river when water is added to the game, but I really like how there's this indented area that looks like people have walked across it, and over a long time it's kind of turned into this path. Here you can see another shot that definitely is supposed to have water in it. I'm presuming this area over here is supposed to be some sort of lake or river, and the area this engineer is currently standing on is some sort of beach or something like that. This over here is a forest, and look how dense the forest is. Part of me is really happy the forest is this dense, as it looks really cool, and part of me is very worried. How am I going to drive a rover through here when rovers are added to the game? I'm going to have to build some sort of machine that grinds down trees and stuff like that. You can see in this screenshot, it says stranded, find the entrance to the old hangar. This is part of the first time user experience, which is basically kind of like a tutorial to the game, where you crash land on a planet, have to find the old hangar, and then once you find the old hangar, there's a ship in it that you need to repair, and then you can use that ship and fly off into space to find a station orbiting the planet. And then on the left hand side, you can see that we have a GPS marker that is pointing to the collapsed entrance of this old hangar, along with an indication of some ores as well. In this screenshot, you can see that we're on a slope of a mountain and there's a cliff face in front of us. And one of the things that's worth pointing out is along this cliff face, you can see that there are these points jutting off of it. In Space Engineers 1, slopes could only go up. There was no overhangs, no bits sticking out of the side of the cliffs and mountains. They would just keep slowly sloping upwards towards the top. And in Space Engineers 2, you can see there's new technology to have these kinds of overhangs jutting out of the cliffs, which makes them look so much more organic and so much more realistic. Here you can see at the top of one of these cliffs, and you can see these little jutting out overhangs all along it here. There's just nothing like this in Space Engineers 1. To think the fact you can take a drill to every part of this cliff face and just drill it away. It's just crazy that this is a real game that we're going to be able to play very soon. There's a couple of screenshots here where they show off these new overhang cliff faces and boulders and stuff like that, and how much they've improved the technology from Space Engineers 1 to create these more detailed environments. And I just can't get enough of how all this looks in Space Engineers 2. I'm a big gameplay guy, I don't really care about visuals as long as the gameplay is good, but even so, these visuals are incredible. They look so good. Like this one here with the big rock jutting up. This just looks great. This is like a landmark in the world. Space Engineers 1's world feel very samey, very generic, and each screenshot I see of Space Engineers 2 feels like its own unique place that you could fly to and say, ah, this is so-and-so, I recognise this place. And I personally can't wait to go to these planets and fly around and just see everything for myself, rather than being limited to these screenshots. Here you can see this beautiful looking base with a ship next to it, on top of the peak of this mountain here. This looks so cinematic. This looks like some sort of base you could visit in a normal game, but this is a base that has been built by someone's hand, each block of it fully destructible, and then all the terrain around the base is also destructible as well. And very, very soon, we're going to be able to play this and make stuff like this ourselves. Here we have another one of these screenshots where there is definitely supposed to be water in the background. This is definitely supposed to be some sort of lake or river back here, but I want to draw your attention to the trees over here and just the sheer variety of them. Sure, there's quite a lot of palm trees, but there's also a bunch of other trees sprinkled in here to give it a bit more variety rather than being the same tree pasted over and over. It looks very good, especially with the mountains and the clouds rolling above in the background. Great stuff. I need to make a new genre screenshot, which is called when you know there's supposed to be water here, but you just can't prove it. As again, I'm like 99% sure there's supposed to be a river going across here. But rather than going on and on about the beauty of these screenshots, I want to draw your attention to down here. I don't think it means anything, I just think it's interesting that it's here. It says name, factory landing pad, and then there's two other names laid over the top of each other. What does that mean? No idea, but I do think it's interesting. There's a couple of time-lapse videos of Space Engineers 2, where they show things like the sunrise and slowly zooming back across the planet. This one here, you can see the sunrise on Verger, the Earth-like planet. As we slowly pull back into space, you can see we fly through the clouds, keep pulling back, until eventually we end up in space, and we can see the planet Verger below us. There's also a second one here, which is at 581 times speed of a ship in the middle of a forest during a sunrise. And as with everything else, it looks absolutely beautiful. And I think one thing worth mentioning is whilst we're at 581 times speed, you can see the trees and the grass all swaying with the wind. And whilst trees do sway a little bit in Space Engineers 1, this visually looks so much better. These trees and plants look like they're actually swaying in the wind. And the grass doing it as well here looks great. I don't recall grass swaying in the wind in Space Engineers 1, so if it does, it never made a very big impact on me like the grass in this video does. And the trees and the grass and the bushes and the rocks and everything in this video comes together to create an absolutely beautiful display. Here we have another sunrise time-lapse, which I believe is from the first time user experience, where you crash land on a planet. And presumably this is the back half of the ship, and you have to make your way from here to wherever the abandoned hangar is. There's not much more to add here other than the fact that the sunrise looks absolutely beautiful, and way better than it looks in Space Engineers 1. Another sunrise, this one above a forest. You can see this huge valley below, and then we pull all the way out into space and get a full view of our planet, Verger, from space. Looking very cloudy, I might say. Whilst they were talking about material transitions between voxels, where rather than being a more abrupt transition, as you can see here, where it goes straight from green grass to gravel, they showed a clip off of a transition area where it's slowly transitioning from grass to sand. And you can see the engineer running along, and I'm presuming the grass and trees are turned off in this clip, as that's why it looks so barren, but man, it does look good. Maybe I'm just jealous. Maybe I just sit here and watch them run across the planet and I'm like, man, I really wish I could run across a planet like this in Space Engineers 2. Soon. Very soon. My jealousy aside, there's a couple of finished biome transitions on these screenshots here, and you can see there are more gradual transition between the different textures, grass to sand, snow to dirt, etc, etc. And this definitely looks much better than the abrupt biome changes we had in Space Engineers 1. And then we have a clip in some sort of Sahara area, where you can see the grass is very, well, dead, and the foliage is more sparse, and we have these different types of trees and bushes, and different types of like dry ground voxel textures. And again, this is all on the same planet that all the other screenshots are from. The planet Verger is going to have so many different biomes for us to explore, and the level of detail and unique assets for each are leagues ahead of anything we had in Space Engineers 1. Look, this tree up here has little fruit pods on it. Oh, can't wait for no one to see this because they play on minimum graphics. As well as overhangs, one of the things they were talking about was rocks. Wow, there are rocks, really interesting. Yeah, but they're cool, okay? They add extra detail, leave me alone. Look at this area down here with the rocks. It's kind of like a barren, like, volcanic area, and it's got these dead trees. How would you know about this volcanic area if you didn't let me talk about rocks for a second? Rock. Is it igneous rocks that are like the lava rocks? I can't remember. I'm sure someone will correct me. Anyway, my number one hope for rocks is that rocks fracture and deform like blocks do in Space Engineers 2, so we can blast apart rocks and stuff. But it'd be cool. That's all I wanted to say. Rocks. Also, these rocks are on Chemic, which is the Mars-like planet that we haven't spoke about at all so far. So I tell you what, why don't we take a look now? Chemic has had very little shown off, mainly because Chemic doesn't have trees, Chemic doesn't have a million biomes, it has like one biome, which is Mars. It has some rocks, which, as we've discussed, I like rocks. But we've had pretty much this one video of Chemic, which is a flyback, like we've had several of on Verger, where we slowly fly back, and then we can see, yes, Chemic is a very Mars-like planet. It's very orange. And as we pull back, we can see some very high cliffs, some very flat areas for driving rovers around on. But the most important thing is if we get far enough back, we can see something very interesting down here. That appears to be a volcano, and a very large one at that. In Space Engineers 1, the Mars-like planet has a volcano on it, which is based on the real-life Olympus Mons, which is the largest mountain and volcano in our solar system, which is situated on real-life Mars. And presumably, this volcano here is in reference to that, either the real-life Olympus Mons or the Space Engineers 1 Olympus Mons, and is the largest peak in the Almagest system. And I'm hoping, like Olympus Mons in Space Engineers 1, there's a little Easter egg in the central crater of it. A monolith, perhaps. Very interesting. You can also see that there appear to be several other volcanoes on the surface, so potentially this one isn't specifically the Olympus Mons one. Potentially there's a couple, potentially there's one that's larger than the rest. One volcano to rule them all. We'll have to wait and see. It was also mentioned on a recent video that the developers are currently reworking parts of Verger to add volcanoes to that planet as well, so Chemic will not be the only planet with volcanoes on it. There's also these two screenshots here on a sunset on Chemic. Rock. And you can see the atmosphere is different on the planet, having a kind of blue-green tint to it. I always felt the Mars-like planet was kind of boring in Space Engineers 1, and I don't know what it is about these screenshots, but from these it definitely looks like a much more enticing destination, and I feel the call to explore it and check out all of its mysteries. There's a couple of other interesting screenshots. The last ones I promise, and then we'll look at something else. We have this screenshot here, which looks like absolute cinema, with the ship crashed into the side of the mountain, and wow, I don't know what else to say. it looks absolutely incredible. I hope this is something we can find, or maybe this is the first time user experience where the ship has crash landed. This looks like a cutscene or one of those AAA video games I never play, but instead it's Space Engineers 2, and everything you see here can be interacted with and destroyed or rebuilt or whatever you want to do. And then we also have this one here with the clouds above it. Absolute cinema. I love this image so much, it's currently my desktop background. It's absolutely fantastic. Anyway, last planet image I want to show you, cactuses. I just think they look cool and I haven't shown any so far. We've so far only looked at a bunch of different trees and not any cactuses, so I thought it was worth showing you. Now, I promised I wouldn't show you any more planet images, but technically, this isn't a planet. It's a brown dwarf star. This is an up-close look of the brown dwarf star that will be at the center of the Almagest system, or at least the center of our playable Almagest system. And whilst it looks a bit more orange than I would imagine, it's definitely shaping up to how I thought it would look. I don't think it's going to be quite this orange in game, as when we look at the map, it's not as glowy and it's more of a subdued brown as opposed to an orange. But still, it's shaping up to look very good. And I can't wait to find out what secrets lie inside of it, because there's a lot of lore around Space Engineers 2 that seems to indicate that there is some sort of mystery with the Delphos Dwarf Star. If you want to find out more about that mystery, check out this video here where we go through all the lore of Space Engineers 2 we know so far. And of course, when we finally discover what the mystery is, I'll of course have covered it on this channel, so don't forget to like and subscribe to see that. So let's quickly speedrun some miscellaneous features. We got a look at the inventory in Space Engineers 2, and whilst this is very interesting, this isn't actually the most interesting thing on this image. On the bottom right, there are slots below the character. And I would suggest that these slots being below the character are things that we can equip to the character. Now, whether that just means bottles for oxygen and hydrogen, or that means something else, like some sort of armor or some other kind of modifier for the player character, like a bigger inventory, for example, we'll have to wait and see. But I do think it's very interesting nonetheless. And also, while we're on this screen, it's also worth mentioning that this inventory screen looks much better than Space Engineers 1. Just from this brief crop screenshot, it already appears much less cluttered and much easier to see what you need. Coloured icons obviously help with that. As we discussed in a previous video, they are a base game Space Engineers 2 feature now. But I think we can all agree that the layout of this inventory screen seems much clearer than the more obtuse Space Engineers 1 inventory. Keeping with inventory improvements, you can see this GIF here where it shows the inventory of the cockpit we're currently sat in, as indicated by the word accessed being written up here, and also the character inventory below. What I want to draw your attention to is that when they pick up this gold with the cursor, the other gold in both inventories is highlighted, presumably to indicate that these can be stacked with the gold that we picked up. And additionally, there's also a red highlight when hovering over an item that the gold cannot be stacked with. This might seem like a minor quality of life improvement, but as Space Engineers 1 players know that the inventory system is, well, crap. Let's be honest. So a small change like this, along with the other changes that have been shown or told about in the past, gives me hope that major steps have been taken to improve the inventory system in Space Engineers 2. One of the main aims of Space Engineers 2 is improved accessibility of the game for both new and old players, and I think this highlighting feature is a perfect example to show this. If you haven't already seen it, Space Engineers 2 has this amazing block fracturing feature where damage to blocks causes pieces of them to fly off and they shatter into pieces and debris when they're destroyed. And we were previously told that this feature would also affect trees as well. And this is the first time we've actually seen that in effect. Now obviously it's turned up really high for debugging purposes to make sure that it all works, but part of me really wishes that this was a feature and trees just exploded into a million pieces when you damage them. But I really like this feature nonetheless. Look at the trees all explode when they shoot them, that's so good. This would be a lot better than what happens in Space Engineers 1, where you hit a tree and either your vehicle comes to a dead stop or the tree just, kind of falls over. They've said what they're showing here is the first implementation of this feature, and they're slowly going to develop and improve it over time. Here's another example on a different tree where they use the drill, which I think this is the first time we've seen the hand drill in game, and they drill under the tree and you can see the tree then falls over and falls to bits. It's got very different fracturing than the other trees do, whereas these trees are bigger, break into bigger chunks. As this is a smaller tree, you can see all the little branches come off instead. I really love how the fracturing works already in Space Engineers 2. It's crazy how much of a difference it makes, and this seems like another really interesting addition to it. I wonder if we can shoot off individual branches from the tree, do a bit of topiary, cut the trees into little shapes, a like button perhaps. And this clip here shows a much better tuned version of the tree fracturing, which is a closer example of how it will be when the update releases. And you can see it's much more natural when the tree falls down, especially on this second tree, which looks pretty much perfect when it falls down. Here's a video showing what happens when you hit a tree with a ship. As you can see, the ship flies into it, and then poof, the branches go everywhere, and interestingly, the ship gets damaged. Then he keeps flying forward and hits another tree, and once again, the tree fractures into pieces, and it knocks our little ship off course. Nice recovery though. In Space Engineers 1, you very rarely, if ever, receive damage from hitting a tree, so it looks like that might have changed in Space Engineers 2. Or maybe this game is still in development and I should just shut the f*** up. Anyway, that aside, it's also worth pointing out that this is the first in-game look at the atmospheric thruster in Space Engineers 2. There's been a couple of other clips and images with them in before, but never close enough to make details out on them. So here it is, I guess. Thruster. And there's another example here of a ship hitting a tree, and the ship seems to escape unscathed this time. The tree, not so much. And then in this example, well, the ship hits the ground, so it seems to fare less well. There's also this video here that shows them pasting in ships and throwing them at high speeds into trees to demonstrate this effect. And this video is probably the best example of tree fracturing we've seen so far. And don't worry, we'll discuss why this ship looks like this whilst being pasted in a second.
What is wrong with you? Why are you blue?
Also, whilst we're adding tree fracturing to the game, please can we add rock fracturing to the game as well? Question mark. I want to hit a rock and break it, please. Rock. Yes! Let's go! Rock fracturing will also be a feature in Space Engineers 2, so I can finally die happy. It's unclear if they will just fracture into pieces when destroyed, or if they could be partially damaged like blocks can, leaving damaged rocks behind. But either way, I am so excited, I can't tell you how much I was looking forward to fracturing for rocks and trees. And speaking of exciting features, Vertical Slice 2 will also include working doors. That's right, doors can now both open and close, and additionally, the door part of the door is now solid, meaning that it won't close while you're standing in the frame, and additionally, you can't walk through the door while it's closed. Wow, it must be a great day for insufferable people. There's a couple of videos showing off safe zones in Space Engineers 2. This one you can see is just a safe zone in space, and you can see the effect. It's quite similar to Space Engineers 1's effect, just like with everything in Space Engineers 2, a bit more detailed, a bit more higher definition. And then there's this example here around the base that I'm currently stood in. And you can see it has a little blue line where it touches the asteroid like shutter shields have in Star Wars, and also has little hexagons on it to indicate that it's some sort of defense shield. It's interesting that they're starting with safe zones as base Space Engineers 2. As Space Engineers 1, they were only added 5 years ago, 6 years ago, which is a long time ago now, but that was what, 8 years, 9 years into Space Engineers development cycle? And presumably these are going to be used to protect bases of both players and NPCs. And speaking of which, we've recently been shown a couple of new NPC designs for Space Engineers 2. Previously, we were shown this concept art for an NPC, and we were told that he would be a significant story NPC in Space Engineers 2. And if you watch my lore video, you would know that there's going to be a Roman-themed faction in Space Engineers 2 called the Legion of Engineers. From the quotes on the loading screens, we know of 2 significant members of the Legion of Engineers, one of them being Dante Appian, who is the leader of their faction, and interestingly is also the person who narrates all the trailers for Space Engineers 2. Because of this, I previously suggested that this design here was Dante, and lo and behold, it is. I will say I really like the Legion suit designs. I like how they're more regal than your traditional spacesuit to emphasize the degree of Roman opulence. It'll really set them apart from other factions. As I mentioned a second ago though, we know of 2 prominent members of the Legion of Engineers, with the second one being Marie Gaia, so I'm presuming this is Marie. I have to say, she's looking pretty fine. You can't leave that in. Mother? I'm not sure I'm a big fan of the skirt slash tights design they've got going on here. It doesn't fit the whole spacesuit angle. I know technically Dante's suit has similar elements, but the higher skirt and the taller boots just give off a different vibe. I don't know. They are a Roman themed faction, so their faction leaders having suits that are more form over function does make sense though. Also, is that a lion or a dog on the middle of the suit? I'm going to presume it's a dog? And it's the wolf that raised Romulus and Remus? I don't know, it's specifically this detail on the suit that makes me think they are a major character in Space Engineers 2 rather than a generic NPC. And perhaps they recognise Marie Gaia as an analogue for the she-wolf of Rome, being a previous leader who raised the Legion of Engineers to where it is. Yes, I do think about the Roman Empire every day. Anyway, enough about Rome, there's also a third NPC design that we've been shown, but we don't know as much about this one. With Dante and Maria having the same jetpack as each other, I think it's possible to infer that this new NPC, having the same jetpack as a previous NPC that we've been shown, might indicate that they are both in the same faction. This NPC is from a faction called Astronauts Without Borders, who apparently embody the ideals of cooperation and oppose the Legion of Engineers. The name of this image is Aya.jpg, so I'm going to presume that Aya will be a major NPC for the AWB, and will potentially be the equivalent of Dante and Marie for their faction. Also quickly, this kind of relates to NPCs, we've been shown work in progress designs for the rifle and rocket launcher coming to Space Engineers 2. The developers have said that these won't be available in Vertical Slice 2, which is when Planets and Survival release, but there are plans for smaller updates between Planets and Survival and Vertical Slice 3 Water that will add things like these weapons and other survival features. Whilst there won't be any NPCs in the Planets and Survival update, that doesn't mean there won't be any random encounters to explore. What you can see on screen here are various experimental random encounters that they've been working on for the next update. All of these are simple static encounters with no AI, but they'll be the basis for future more reactive encounters once things like combat and NPCs are added to the game. But whilst they're supposed to be simple encounters, this one here looks absolutely amazing. It's some sort of base on an ice asteroid, and the way the ice juts out around this base looks super cool, so don't count out these encounters just yet. One thing they've been experimenting with is cutscenes, which we know will be used as part of the optional story in Space Engineers 2. This here is a prototype cutscene where it appears two engineers get into some sort of argument, so the blue engineer just decks the red engineer, knocking him out cold. They're probably arguing about the cable or something. It's also worth noting that the red engineer here has a different face from the base engineer we've seen. So this, plus Dante's beautiful mug, would lead me to believe there's some sort of face customization in Space Engineers 2. Makes sense as you don't want all the NPCs in the game to have the exact same face, and it also means that we'll finally escape from the generic white man from Space Engineers 1. Ooh, put it away! They also showed off some super early tests of using motion capture to create cutscenes. You can see this one here is getting out of a cryopod, and it's notably recorded without the need for a motion capture suit. This guy over here is DeFontaine, one of the developers of Space Engineers 2, and I've been following him on social media for a while where he experiments with this kind of stuff. So don't take this as a final animation or cutscene for Space Engineers 2, they're just testing how this technology can be used for the game. There's also a second one of these experiments for getting back into the pod, and it's all very impressive how this works. It's obviously not live, the left is a recording and the right is a translation into the game, but it does seem that tech like this would make it much easier and more streamlined to get animations into the game. Also, just as an addendum to this section, I'm sure a couple of you saw this and like me thought of VR. VR isn't on the roadmap for Space Engineers 2, and the developers have said they have no plans to add it to the game. However, one of the developers of Space Engineers 2 has recently revealed that they are working on a mod that adds rudimentary VR support to the game. You can see some footage of the mod on screen here, and I'll link the full video in the description for you to check out if you're interested. But I have to say, personally, I am very excited for this. As I said, this is a mod and not official VR support, so keep that in mind, it's not going to be fully integrated support. And also, we don't know if or even when this mod will be released. It's just something that I know people are interested in, and it's something that you can be hopeful for in the future. Mostly hopeful that I can buy a VR headset as a business expense. Yes, that'll be excellent. I think it's also worth going over this section here about performance optimizations in Space Engineers 2, as I know it's something that a lot of people are interested in. There is a spreadsheet here which shows some examples of performance in Space Engineers 2, and they specifically highlighted the load time, and as you can see, as the version number increases, the load time of the game decreases. Performance is one of the main reasons Space Engineers 2 exists, to give the game better performance, so this is a big focus of theirs, and obviously the performance will get better as we go through early access. And also, increasing the performance also helps the developers. As you can see here, if it's taking 60 seconds to load into a world, that's 60 seconds every time the developers want to test something. And as they've already shaved over 15 seconds off that time, that's multiple 15 seconds that add up to speed up the development. I would imagine towards the end of the development, when all the features are in the game, there will also be another massive performance push in order to get the game to full release, so don't expect absolutely perfect performance during early access, but know that it is something the developers have on their mind. Like for example, this GIF here shows something called LODs for a ship in Space Engineers 2, which is the idea that the quality of models of things in the distance is reduced to improve game performance. And previously we were shown this video here, which shows that trees that are a certain distance away from the player are faked, so they're not using up unneeded performance. It's all good stuff. Here we can see one of our first looks at the welder in Space Engineers 2, and you can see rather than it being the traditional welder that we have in Space Engineers 1, it's a more high-tech, not super futuristic, I'm sure there are welders like this in real life, but it definitely looks more like a tool of the future than what we had in Space Engineers 1. And an interesting feature of the welder is that it has different effects for the particles to better indicate if you're too far away from a block to weld it. You can see that when you're too far away from the block, the flares stick close to the welder, and when you're close enough to weld it, the flares then extend over to the block. This is such a clear way of indicating this, and little quality of life improvements like this are just as important to Space Engineers 2 as the major changes like the 25 centimeter grid system and water are. And the first look at the welder also nicely brings us on to our next topic, which is build states. As you can see here, there's a hydrogen tank, and the player pulls out a grinder, and then starts to grind it down. And you can see that it goes down 2 build states, and they walk around it, then they do it again, it goes down another build state, and then they continue to grind it periodically, so they take it down the build states. And in Space Engineers 1, blocks only have 4 build states, the frame, the 2 intermediate states, and the fully built state. And in Space Engineers 2, it appears that blocks will have a couple more intermediate build states. In this clip here, you can see an engineer grinding down a wall, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then afterwards they weld it back up, and then afterwards they grind it back down again. So there's at least 6 intermediate build states, which would mean there's at least 8 in total, double that which was in Space Engineers 1. And obviously these are more than just build states, as every state of building is also another cosmetic thing you can use on your ships and bases. A good example of this is this build state here, which is a mostly complete block with a couple of panels missing from it. And I think these missing panels would be great to add extra details to your ships and bases. And like the fully built blocks, the ground down walls also fracture like the regular walls do, which means even when these blocks are ground down, they still have the same destructive function they would if they were fully welded up. There's also this video here of a gravity generator being welded up, and as you can see, it still has these 6 build states that the hydrogen tank had. And more interestingly, as this block is welded up, you can see that there are little welding particles appearing inside of it. And I actually really like this detail. It kind of implies that you're welding up the whole block, whereas before you're kind of just poking a welder at it and then it just magically comes together. I know it is still technically the same thing that's happening, but the particles inside of it imply that your welder has some sort of, magic to it. It's a video game, who cares? That one guy in the comments cares. He really cares a lot. Along with these videos, we've also received a bunch of images of blocks at various build stages, and more importantly, blocks that we haven't actually seen in game yet. Here you can see that there are 3 different sizes of batteries, which is really interesting. I'm not sure we've actually seen the large battery yet. Maybe an old concept art? And here you can see multiple blocks with 3 different build stages. So part of me wonders if there's some sort of automation to get the other 3 build stages in there. And I want to draw your attention to this block over here on the right, which is the welder, which technically is hidden in the files for the game and you can actually access, but it's not currently available in Space Engineers 2 at the moment. And also, it has the 4 prongs on it, much like the hand welder does, implying it's some sort of future magic welder thingy. And here finally you can see a ship where a bunch of the blocks on it have been ground down to different amounts, so you can start to get an idea of how ships will look as you're building them. And speaking of building ships, one of the new features of Space Engineers 2 is when you're in survival, you can place down blocks you don't have the resources for as projections. You can see in this clip here, they're placing down a blueprint in survival, and as you're in survival and you don't have the resources to place these blocks, and also you need to weld them up in survival anyway, it instead places down a projection. The idea behind the blocks you place being projections is that it gives you access to essentially creative mode building in survival. You can place in blueprints as you can see here, and you also have access to tools like copy and paste and undo and redo. And because of all of this, the projection building feature will alleviate a lot of the tedium of building in survival. And the final feature I want to mention is this here, reactor destruction. Now on the surface this might not look like much. Oh, the reactor gives out a bit of green smoke, it did that in Space Engineers 1, why'd you care? Well, what I'm primarily interested in here isn't actually the reactor smoke, or the electricity, or the flaming block or whatever. It's the little particles you can see hovering around the reactor. This kind of like green fuzz around it. It's much clearer to see it on these small reactors. You see how there's that little shimmer there? I think that's a very interesting detail. Also, just before we talk about what that detail could mean, I really like how there's a green glow at the core of this reactor when it's damaged. I think that looks super cool. In a previous teaser for Space Engineers 2, we saw a list of all the different damage types, and one of those damage types was radiation. Now, radiation was recently added to Space Engineers 1, but the developers have said in the past that anything added in the Space Engineers 1 survival update won't necessarily be in Space Engineers 2 at release. They definitely said that was the case for food, but is potentially radiation going to be a feature in Space Engineers 2 by default? It was there in the list of damage sources, so that does increase the possibility, and I think this little fuzz around the reactor is definitely supposed to indicate some sort of radioactive presence. I mean, so does the green gas coming out and the glowing green core of the reactor, so maybe it means nothing. But I feel like these particles are definitely a direct allusion to a radiation effect, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, as I mentioned, that's the last feature I wanted to talk about because I've been recording for like 3 hours now. So if you appreciate the effort I've put into getting this news and information to you, don't forget to like this video and also subscribe to this channel if you want to see what's coming next for Space Engineers 2. And maybe very soon we'll get to play it ourselves. And also a special thanks to my supporters who you can see on the left. And if you would like to support this channel, you can become a YouTube member or a Patreon with the links in the description below.